USA, China, France, Brazil, Germany. Almost every country in the world should. But if they all owe, then to whom? And why do those who call debt a dangerous problem continue to earn billions of dollars on it themselves? Today I'm going to tell you the truth, which has been hidden for 44 years. Why is the national debt not a problem, but a tool? How does he turn 1% of the richest people in the world into the real owners of this planet? And how can Bitcoin free us from these shackles? Currently, the global public debt is $100 trillion. Approximately. Because this figure is constantly growing, and the data is getting a little outdated. So take all the numbers that I give in this video with caution, as they change very quickly. Let's figure out why the global elite, which calls the debt bubble a big problem, and that something needs to be done about it, is actually cynically, brazenly, and hypocritically lying to us. And he's been lying for 44 years. It was 44 years ago in the 80s that the debts of states around the world began to grow by leaps and bounds. Governments have realized that this is the best way to stimulate the economy in the context of globalization. Debts began to grow especially quickly in the 2008 year and during the coronavirus in the 2020. Roughly speaking, the United States is now one of the largest debtors in the world. Their total debt reaches almost $37 trillion, but every 100 days this number grows by another $1 trillion. And to realize the scale, just look that 1,000,000 seconds is 11.5 days, and 1,000,000,000,000 seconds is 31,710 years. Thus, about a third of the total public debt in the world belongs to the United States of America. But here's the paradox. The more debt the US has, the more money there is in the world. Why? Because the US debt is the dollar, and the dollar is the world's reserve currency. When America borrows money, it issues government bonds and buys them absolutely the whole world. Strange pension funds, central banks, billionaires, and even ordinary retail investors. They buy bonds and get interest, which means that the US debt is someone's profit, and someone's profit is new money. As a result, the more US debt, the more money there is in the world. At the moment, the largest holders of American debt are Japan, China, the United Kingdom, and other countries. China is the second debtor in the world. It owes more than $15 trillion. Japan owes about $11 trillion. Followed by Great Britain, France for $3 or $4 trillion. Other countries, such as Italy, India, Germany, are approximately at the same levels. However, as you can see, there are a huge number of other countries with debts. This is almost every country in the world, with the exception of about 10 failed states. In other words, 99.9% of the world's countries live in debt. And this is perceived as something absolutely normal. So why then do we keep being told that the national debt is that bad? The answer to this question is very simple and obvious. The national debt of a country is a currency that it actually issues and puts into circulation in its jurisdiction. This is necessary for the functioning of its local economy. Therefore, the global public debt. This is simply the global money supply. But who owns this money supply? This is the question that I recently heard on the radio and became very interested in it. I studied it and was quite surprised by the answers. First of all, I expected that a significant part of this public debt would belong to other countries. For example, in the case of the United States, I expected that a significant part of the total US government debt would belong to the central banks of other countries. But in fact, the central banks of other countries have acquired only 1/8 of the US national debt, which is just over $4 trillion out of $37 trillion. The rest of the debt is in private circulation. In the case of the UK, we see that 1/6 of their debt belongs to foreign governments. In France, this is 1/5, about the same as in Germany. But Japan is different from other developed countries. Despite the fact that it has one of the largest public debts in the world, more than 200% of GDP, almost all of this debt is located inside the country and belongs either to the Japanese government or to the Japanese themselves. That's exactly the point, friends. There is a huge amount of debt in the world that is privately owned. This is probably about 80% of the total global debt. But who are these private owners? If you have a pension, then you are definitely the holder of this debt. Pension funds are one of the largest holders of public debt. In the UK, for example, about 30% of the country's total public debt belongs to pension and insurance companies. They need it to ensure their work, because only the UK government is the only guaranteed player that will never go bankrupt, and will always be able to pay off their debts in pounds sterling, the currency that it prints itself. Therefore, pension companies that have to fulfill long-term obligations to people are simply obliged to have such guarantees. This is the only way they will be able to fulfill their promises. And this is true not only for the UK, but also for the United States and for Europe, where most of the public debt also belongs to pension funds. And that's the point. Money, or rather public debt, which billionaires are so worried about, actually lies at the very heart of the work of the private financial sector. And we would never have guessed it if we had judged only by what they say. But there is something much more important. If public debt is the foundation of the private sector financial industry, then it is also the foundation of the private sector as a whole. This is the foundation of private wealth, which is managed by financial institutions such as banks, investment companies, and pension funds. And most of the private wealth managed by these institutions belongs to only a small group of people, just a few % of the world's population. We all know that wealth in the world is very unevenly distributed. If there are 8 billion people in the world, then only 80 million of them own a significant part of all wealth, the state of 2024 year, and now I think these figures are even more. In the US, the top 1% of the population will own half of corporate shares. And if we take the top 10 of the population, they already own 92.5% of the shares. It's just crazy. And if these people who are in the top 1% own debt through pension funds and similar institutions, then the interest paid on the national debt in the amount of about $3 and $2 trillion can amount to about $40,000 a year for each of those people who are in the top 1% of the richest people in the world. Think about it, $40,000 a year in interest paid to 80 million people, but the other 99% on average receive only $13,500 a year. Thus, the richest earn potentially 3 times more than all the other people on the planet who work hard. Yes, these figures are simplified, rounded, they are extrapolated. And they are bound to be not quite accurate. But I want to emphasize this, that these are not exact calculations. I am working on the basis of simplified assumptions, but I am doing this in order to show how great the bias in this system is in favor of those who already own a lot of wealth. Sometimes you can hear the richest people in the world complain that the government spends too much, gets into debt, and all this will allegedly become a heavy burden for future generations. And there is some truth in this, I will tell you later. Right-wing politicians like to repeat the same words. But the basic truth is this: when the state creates debt, someone has to buy it. And the owners of this debt are, of course, rich and ultra-rich people, because they are the ones who have the extra money to buy it. For example, Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett now own more short-term treasury bonds than the US Federal Reserve itself. And now attention. Every time the government pays interest on this debt, the wealth of rich people becomes even greater. They rarely spend this interest, which means they just buy even more bonds. As a result, wealth is super concentrated in the hands of a minority. Moreover, as you can see on this graph, concentration is accelerating exponentially. And the world is becoming more and more unequal. The global inequality of well-being in the 2021 year is visualized on this map. In every country, the richest 5% own more wealth than the poorest 80%. I think that over the past 4 years, this picture has only worsened. That's the magic of debt. The rich are getting richer. And all this is quite legal, just at the expense of interest. But when these debts are issued, when this money is printed, we, ordinary people, pay for it. Do you think the rich consider this a problem? Hardly. As a result, The top 1% of the population has accumulated more wealth than the entire middle class in America. This is what happens when governments print money and spend what they don't have. This is an unstable path that sooner or later will lead to a big catastrophe. Well, for example, in Japan, almost all of the public debt belongs to the state and not to private investors. Private investors, the richest people on this planet, do not earn on this public debt. And it works. In the United States, we have seen something similar in times of crisis, during a pandemic, for example, or during the collapse of the 2008 year here. This is indicated by the growth of this graph. Then the state actually bought up the debt. We need to take control of the national debt. We need to regain control over money and leave it not in the hands of private investors, banks, or financial corporations, but return it to the public sphere, where the interests of people are higher than the interests of the top 1% of the population. States can come up with something, but if they can't or won't, then we have only one way out: Bitcoin. I just don't see any options anymore. After all, it was originally conceived as a way to return power over money to people. If states want to repeat the mistakes of the past, they want to repeat the Great Depression, the collapse of the Roman Empire, and so on. Let them do it, and we will defend ourselves as best we can. But so far, the power over money belongs to 1% of the population. And Bitcoin solves this issue. So, to the question who owns the debt, the answer is very simple. The rich people of the world own it. And they win by having this tool. They become richer. Their power grows so much that it may overtake the power of entire states. The same BlackRock, for example. Assets under his management are estimated at $11 and $6 trillion. Many states have much smaller economies. That is why they do not need, it is not profitable for them, to do something about it or change something. Therefore, all their public statements are hypocritical in fact. And if only we understood that. If only people understood that. But 99% of the world's people live in the sweet illusion of a lie. But now you know it. Now you know what to do. Go and tell everyone about it. Go and tell the world that the national debt is not a problem. The problem is who earned it and why. That's it. See you in the new videos. See you soon.